Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian he never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach
The European Parliament votes on Tuesday in a secret ballot for the next EU Commission president, with German Defense Minister von der Leyen the quote-unquote agreed-upon nominee. But complications abound, and if she does not get the required votes, or if the vote is postponed, or if British MEPs put her over the top, the EU's already tattered reputation could take another hit, complicating further Zoran Zaev's pleading with the EU for a date to start membership talks for Macedonia. Meanwhile, President Macron of France, a shrewd player in the EU politics game and one rumored to be not very fond of giving a date to Macedonia to start EU accession talks, is biding his time and counting his cards, so to speak, as a wounded Angela Merkel continues shaking, literally, raising questions about her health and how long she will remain in the position of German Chancellor. In Macedonia, fallout from Zaev's gullibility and falling for a couple of pranksters over a long period of time continues, with his diminished standing in Macedonia and abroad. But Macedonians and international leaders are simply embarrassed by his antics, and there are growing calls for him to step down and call early elections. We'll discuss all of this and more in this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Shalimanov. I'm calling in from the Casablanca of the Balkans, Skopje, Macedonia. Casablanca is not as a city which has Mediterranean access, which we obviously don't, but it's a city which is so full of spies right now that's the main industrial branch at this point in Skopje.
I love it. Although, of course, as we know, as we discussed in our tourism podcast a few weeks ago, as you get further south, it feels more Mediterranean there. And, this is summer, so we want to encourage people not only to experience the many spies running around Macedonia, but also the more Mediterranean climate down to the south.
Yeah.
Well, Cvetin, we just recorded a podcast last week, not even a week ago, and today we're recording this on July 14, Sunday, Bastille Day, for all of our friends in France. It'll probably drop tomorrow, July 15, and I celebrate May 25 as the first time, May 25, 1996, the first time I ever set foot in Macedonia, so that's kind of my anniversary date. But it was July 15, 1996, 23 years ago, that I arrived in Macedonia with 2 pieces of luggage for what I thought would be a 3-month gig with the humanitarian group Mercy Corps, living in Macedonia, but working both in Macedonia and Kosovo. So 23 years ago, the second time actually I arrived, but I arrived with an intention to stay for 3 months. And here we are, 23 years later, Cvetin, after, of course, I lived in Macedonia for 7 years, from 96 to 2003, and then spent most of the aughts there. But here we are, 23 years later, and we're doing a podcast. I got the weekly column. I've done all these things regarding Macedonia. So all to say, it's kind of amazing in life, and this is kind of a 30,000-foot, 10,000-meter perspective. It's kind of amazing when you think you know what you're going to do, and all of a sudden something else happens. And at least for me, I'm so glad that I have got to have spent all this time in Macedonia. I think that's where God wants me to be and put me. And I know that my enemies don't feel the same way, but too bad for them.
Yeah, well, I have many more friends here than enemies, considering your contribution and all the work you've been doing around. But yeah, I can imagine that both of us have stepped on a few toes here and there.
Absolutely. So anyway,
it means we're doing something right, I guess.
I think so. Yeah. So and of course, if you don't have any enemies, then you're probably doing something wrong. So that's always the case. Well, but anyway, moving on. Let's talk about news from Macedonia. I think the continuing fallout from Zaev's gullibility and with the pranksters continues. I see stuff in the news, on social media, etc. What do you hear from what's going on in Macedonia with regard to the fallout from that?
Well, I actually spoke to one of those guys, the one who was pretending to be Poroshenko.
Oh.
I did an interview with him for
Very
a news
cool.
site. I work with occasionally here, and with Lexus. I spoke with Lexus, Alexei Stolyarov, and I mean, my only question was, why did you break it off? Because at one point, Zaev was the one who was calling them and texting them. Everybody
Wow.
else saw through the ploy in like 10 minutes, and Zaev took about a year to. He would never have realized that he's being pranked. He would still think that he's communicating with the actual Poroshenko. And I tell them, why do you break it off? We're on the verge of joining NATO. You can have. Imagine the stuff he would be able to give you. he can WhatsApp use, they use this WhatsApp application. He can WhatsApp NATO weapon specs to you directly. But they said, okay, we were bored. We're not an intelligence agency. Obviously, they want to dispel this.
No, they're
notion
comedians. They're doing it for fun. So
yeah, I mean, maybe not. Who cares? It was great fun in either case. And one of the things Zaev himself revealed was that he sent them a picture of an Israeli-Austrian businessman who works with social democratic parties across Europe, helping them organize their propaganda campaigns. Tal Silberstein. And the person became notorious in Austria in 2017 because he was setting up fake news websites and Facebook groups in which Silberstein would work with the Austrian Social Democrats to bring down their then coalition partner, the Conservative Party OVP, led by Sebastian Kurz, by accusing OVP of being racist. So he would set up like fake statements from OVP people, from Kurz's people, in which they would be over-the-top nationalist, almost Austrian fascist, etc. And he was paid like 400,000 euros by the Social Democrats for all of this. And the news broke before their 2017 elections in Austria. Mm-hmm. And it actually, Silberstein's antics actually damaged his employer a lot. They actually helped bring down, significantly weaken the Social Democratic Party, which allowed Kurz to form a coalition with the more nationalist FPO party. Mm-hmm. And then 2 years later, this Ibiza scandal appears again in front of elections, in front of the European elections, and it brings down the FPO. It reveals that the FPO leader, the nationalist leader in Austria, in coalition with Kurz, is discussing with a Russian woman who presents herself as, working for some businessman, yada, yada, yada. And they're talking business and corrupt business, I guess. So this helped bring down the Kurz government. And Kurz actually went public and said that the people like Tal Silberstein were involved in bringing down his government. So the funny thing is, Zaev is meeting Silberstein in Skopje. Obviously, they're doing something. They're setting up. He's obviously helping Zaev on Zaev's propaganda machine, which is just as despicable and fake news oriented, etc. And then he's. And I suppose this Silberstein guy by now has this reputation of bringing down a party which was seen in Europe as pro-Russian, even though maybe he was faking the whole Russian angle with fake Russians, but okay, who cares? And Zaev is so stupid, he's actually tweeting pictures of himself and Silberstein to actual Russian pranksters.
Wow.
So, he's telling Russian pranksters who are secretly recording Zaev, their calls with Zaev, that he's meeting with this Israeli guy who is notorious for similar fake news, manipulative propaganda campaigns he's doing, but his are oriented against Russia. And Zaev is actually informing Russians about the movements. He's telling them, Silberstein is flying from Skopje to Kiev tomorrow to meet you, my friend Poroshenko. And the Russian guy says, oh yes, I know, Silberstein is a great guy. Excellent that you're working with him. All right.
So let me ask you this.
What a
Do we
moron.
know? Yes. Do we know if there's are there going to be any more recordings or texts or tweets or SMS messages coming out from the pranksters that recorded Zaev?
No, this should be it. They told me this is it.
All right. Well, it's enough, and it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure that we'll continue to enjoy that for some time to come. Although, again, as many in Macedonia have called for Zaev to resign because he's an embarrassment. And again, it goes back, I think, to his he has a fleet of 4,584 advisors or something like that, and every single one of them should be fired for allowing this to happen. I mean, yeah, Zaev's an idiot, we know that, but you would assume that these advisors that he has are a little bit smarter than him, but apparently they're not.
Yeah, it's he's surrounding himself with people like this Silberstein. He's got obviously a similar profile person in Eric Burns, the American Media Matters for America advisor who is detached with his government. There is another person who apparently works with Silberstein, who is on the record as being Zaev's advisor. So Zaev came out after the recordings and he accused the Russian pranksters of producing fake news about him, which is not true. I mean, this is not fake news. This is him being an idiot. But he wants to use the incident to justify additional. Zaev's government is already going after people for simple Facebook comments, accusing everybody on the right of spreading hate speech, and they're sending police to people's homes in the afternoon and the evening to scare them against criticizing Zaev. Now he would like to use this regulation he's announcing, anti-fake news regulation, to shut down news outlets which he doesn't like. While at the same time he's employing a fake news propagandist from Austria who has criminal charges in Romania, in Israel, for this type of sleaze and corruption and setting up fake Facebook groups. I mean, this podcast is jokingly called the Macedonian Content Farmers, but Zaev is working with an Austrian-Israeli content farmer. And then obviously the other thing which stuck from the scandal is how scared Zaev is of the Kosovo-Serbia proposed border change, which he obviously realizes will mean the end of Macedonia. I mean, once we begin redrawing borders in Macedonia, and especially if at that point Macedonia is not led by a government which represents ethnic Macedonians here, that would be the end of the country easily. I mean, that would snap Macedonia as a twig. And he's accusing Vučić of being a Russian agent. Okay, fine. I mean, that's... he literally every second word Zaev uses in these tapes is Russia, Russia, Russia is the problem, Russia is the root of all evil. In the case of Vučić, obviously Vučić is playing this card. He wants to be like, on the one hand I work with the West, on the other with Russia.
Sure.
But then he's accusing Hashim Tači in Kosovo of doing the same. So he's actually accusing a pro-Erdoganist president of Kosovo of also being a pro-Russian and anti-Western person, which can cause all sorts of trouble in Kosovo domestically and from Kosovo toward Macedonia. So quite not the sharpest tool in the shed.
Definitely not. And interesting, I want to go back to what you just said about the so-called quote-unquote hate speech. Again, there is no such thing as hate speech. But maybe he's not arresting people for so-called hate speech, but sending the police to intimidate and threaten folks who say things that he doesn't like. So for all of our friends that are in NATO, NATO member countries, etc., this is a country, Macedonia, and the government of Zoran Zaev, that is about to become a member of NATO, that threatens to arrest and intimidates citizens for exercising their free right to speech. Well done, good one there. I want to talk about this the Boki 13 scandal. I don't think we talked about it last week. I saw it in passing, Cvetin. But before we do, I just got to pour myself another mastica here. So just a moment.
Yeah, I'm on antibiotics unfortunately right now. So you're going to be drinking solo this time.
Okay, well there we go. Nice glass of mastica here. So the Boki 13 scandal, fill us in and fill me in because I haven't really followed it.
Yeah, we didn't have enough time the last time. I just ticked off a few scandals, and we had so much going on after the what was it, week and a half hiatus. It's probably the most bizarre corruption scandal we've ever had. We've had some doozies, and this is a repeat of a corruption scandal like the one which we had in A1. The concept of the scandal is you have a powerful TV station, which has journalists which have cooperated with the secret police, come from the left, obviously with their background and baggage in this area. They have, they're essentially approaching business people, politicians, and telling them, listen, I have information from my sources, you know who my sources are, you understand that much. I have a powerful media outlet, I'm going to bury you, I'm going to publish damaging information against you, so you better pay up. The A1 scandal included not paying taxes, not paying the rent, not paying the employees, blah, 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 and it ended badly for their owner. But as soon as Zaev took over the government, so A1 collapsed in 2010, 2011, with a widely publicized raid, and then this made Philip Ricker get all angry at VMRO. I suppose that much of what has been happening since then by the U.S. diplomacy against VMRO comes from the fact that Phil Ricker was angry because he had a bunch of friends in A1 and they were, nobody lost their jobs. They just moved on to different. To being funded by USAID or Soros or whoever, but he was angry that A1 was closed. Now, as soon as Zaev formed the government, Boki 13 shows up and he sets up a TV station named obviously after A1. It's called One TV. Boki 13, Bojan Jovanovski is his name. He's this flamboyantly cross-dressing personality who is, Serbian kitschiest reality TV programs. He would be there to be like this object of mockery. So imagine if you're in a room of this type of people who would participate in a Serbian kitschy reality TV show, and if you are the butt of the joke, you can imagine how low you are on the totem pole. And then all of a sudden he's got odes of money. He's setting up this lavishly funded TV station. He's paying Sasha Ordanovsky. He's paying
what's the name of this TV station?
One TV. The name is obviously ripped from A1.
Sure.
And so he sets up the TV station modeled after A1. Many of the same personalities there. And then one businessman appears, another businessman appears. They say he's racketeering us. He threatens that he's going to publish something against me on his TV station if I don't give him, in the case of one residential developer, an entire apartment for him in my new building. And then eventually Gruevski, a journalist who is very close to SDSM, but has now obviously, who defended Velia Ramkovsky A1 in the original similar scandal. Apparently he's not part of this organization now. He apparently feels bad that he's left out of it. So he goes with public revelations accusing Boki 13, Alexander Kiratsovsky, the recently deposed SDSM party secretary general, and a bunch of lesser personalities like Frosina Remensky, Lila Filipovska. Gruevski is careful to use all these nicknames for them. So Boki is called Koki, Kiratsovsky is called Kiki in his writing, Frosina Remensky is called Friki. Some of them acknowledge that they are the ones who are being written about. So others obviously still haven't come up, but Gruevski is careful not to be sued over this, but the names he's using are so easy to, everybody with a half a brain can tell them. And the way they would do this is they would approach a businessman and tell him, in one case he details, they asked for a huge bribe, which this person claimed he doesn't have as revenue, not as profits, just as revenue annually. And they asked this as a bribe. And the person allegedly fainted and almost died from heart attack when he heard the price in the presence of powerful SDSM officials around Boki 13 demanding the money. In the other story, he tells they got a piece of land in, I suppose, Ohrid from the municipality for free, and then they ostensibly to build up like a shelter for like an orphanage or whatever. Boki is big on these fake humanitarian projects. And then they sold it for commercial development. So this is what Gruevski details. But also, eventually, in the worst case, they approached a former mayor in Skopje. There are two possibilities. I mean, it's pretty clear. It's one of them, but okay, let's not use the name. A person who has been attacked badly by SDSM after SDSM took over the government, and they extorted money from him, again, hundreds of thousands of euros from his business, using wiretaps. Now, Boki has hired the son of Katica Janeva, the special prosecutor, in his television. Sasha Ordanovsky, who works for Boki, is the most outspoken supporter of Katica Janeva. So now we have a corrupt TV station, corrupt owner, corrupt party officials using wiretaps from Zaev's cache of wiretaps to blackmail people around Macedonia, extorting money from them. And this is all reported not by somebody on the right, but by a prominent leftist journalist who was breaking bread with all these people literally until yesterday. So it's quite, the cross-dressing aside.
The cross-dressing, yes, the freakishness of Boki 13 aside, the corruption, the nepotism, etc. Interesting because, again, here we are. I started the monologue talking about the European Union Commission jockeying and whatnot, and whether or not Macedonia is going to get a date for accession talks this fall or not. And part of that, of course, hinges on the idea that Macedonia is quote unquote ready to start those accession talks. But what you're just describing, Cvetin, with all of this corruption that's going on, and it's out in the open, frankly. Countries like France and the Netherlands and some of these others that are a little bit skeptical of giving Macedonia, not to say nothing of Albania, a date to start accession talks, are going to look at this ongoing corruption and say, well, maybe not. Doesn't matter what Zaev did with Greece and forcibly changing the name, etc. I just can't see how Macedonia is ready to start accession talks.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, really ugly. I mean, no other country in Europe has this percentage of opposition members of parliament in prison, under investigation, forced to vote this way or the other, to be released from prison, former officials in prison, number of media outlets shut down in the brief 2 years since Zaev's government, and then this sleaze and corruption which Zaev had before taking over the government, which is now coming up magnified, multiplied. I mean, obviously my opinion of the EU is exceptionally low, and
mine too.
I think we are operating on the assumption that it would be actually hilarious if we did join and made as much mess of the union as possible and shock everybody inside with all these types of corruption, but then reinforced even further once we have access to their funding, to the money they're giving. Actually, imagine once Zaev taps into the actual sources of EU funding, that's going to be a completely new ball game.
Yeah, because then all that has gone on before would just be chump change compared to the money that the EU would then give the government of Zoran Zaev that would then misappropriate and abuse it.
Yeah, he will be taking European farm subsidies for cannabis cultivation and then, selling it illegally through Europe. It's going to be.
Wow. Well, again, yeah, that's.
So, but then we have to begin accession talks, and this obviously depends on Angela Merkel being in working order by until October, which is when we expect that the council will discuss this thing again. Maybe they weekend at Bernie's her and. We get the accession talks this way, but then there is this interesting development to mention that they'll be voting on Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament soon, and she's actually being pressured. One of the main demands so that she gets the votes she needs to be elected Commission President from the Socialist part of the Parliament, from the Social Democrats, is that she agrees publicly, openly, that Macedonia and Albania should begin accession talks, because both countries are now among the very few countries in Europe run by social democratic parties. Mm-hmm. And van der Leyen is dependent on the social democratic vote, and they want to deliver for Zaev and Rama, the social mm-hmm. democrats in the European Parliament, and they demand her commitment on this issue. So basically, they want us to open accession talks, but also the Visegráds want us to open accession talks, because people like Orban and Salvini, they all signed up on this, the Poles, etc., and the Brits, mm-hmm. Ironically, hilariously. And this is all because they recognize that once we join, we will quickly revert to our Visegrad style, right-wing, the Gruevski style of doing politics, which they like, and which maybe served as a blueprint for some of these guys, for at least some of these guys, if not all of them. And so now the Social Democrats want us in, the right-wingers want us in, but these centrist conservatives, and especially the liberal Democrats in the Netherlands and France, they're having second thoughts, because they realize what happens when even more countries like ours join the European Union, when Serbia, Montenegro join, all the mess they'll be exposed to. So it's a very, very comical situation in Brussels at this point.
Well, exactly, and even if von der Leyen gets in on Tuesday and things proceed as they've agreed in their smoke-filled back rooms, even if all that happens and she says yes, we'll start accession talks with Macedonia and Albania in the fall, that doesn't mean anything. There's a lot that could happen between now and then, and so we'll just kind of have to watch that and see. As we just talked about, there's a lot of baggage that Macedonia would bring with it, and Albania would bring with it as well if they were to start accession talks. There's a lot of countries in Europe that don't want to have that, while the EU is in such a mess as it is.
No, it's I mean, at this point, I'm obviously option one for us was always that we drop the name talks, we stay Republic of Macedonia, and we never join the EU. Maybe join NATO as some kind of like an accession, like a non-voting member or something. But we just trade with the EU, and that's it. But right. Now I'm beginning to warm to this idea that we actually join the EU and mess them up real bad.
Oh yeah, I mean that's frankly, there were some members of the EU that really wanted the UK to exit, to Brexit, because of people like Boris Johnson and others who said that once in the EU they would kind of mess it up, and so the EU members didn't want them in there to mess it up, and yeah, I think that's a real possibility of countries, the Visegrad countries, etc. that you mentioned. Once Macedonia is in the EU, if it ever gets in the EU, then essentially serving the role of quote unquote wreckers.
Yeah. This former French ambassador to Washington, Gérard Ayrault, or if I'm pronouncing this correctly, pardon my French, he actually said as much. So he's basically one of the premier diplomats of France. The ambassador to Washington recently resigned with his boyfriend to spend his retirement on the Côte d'Azur, I suppose. And he was tweeting at a British guy very openly on Twitter, telling them, why do we need countries like Macedonia, Albania to join? This is your British plot. You want to bring these countries into the EU to wreck our lovely union. You want to bring more and more of these bleep hole countries into the union. And it's great. I mean, the Brits are leaving, but they're pushing us in. They're setting things up so that, as Zaev would say, the Netherlands or France, they would be embarrassed not to let us join after all these concessions we've made. And once we're in, we revert to or Zaev or whoever is in charge, or Vimmer if Vimmer take over. I mean, the best the EU could hope for would be for a Vimmer government to take over, because Vimmer had some standards and some morals and some principles. I mean, I'm actually even thinking that it would be actually funnier to have Zaev run Macedonia in the EU for a few years, just to give them a taste of their own medicine.
Right. Well, I think this speaks to the hardcore EU folks who want to continue to usurp power from the individual sovereign nation states that make up the EU, because that's what they don't. What they don't want is sovereign parliaments of EU member states making decisions, because that then tends to, what we're just talking about, they then have the right to interfere and wreck and whatever the beautiful EU project, quote unquote. And so that is why the hardcore EU types really want to, the ever closer union and more Europe, etc., that they all talk about, so that if the individual sovereign nation states that make up the European Union have no power whatsoever, and it's all controlled and centralized in Brussels, then there's nothing that these folks can do. They can't wreck or disrupt or do anything else. And that's ultimately the goal of these hardcore EU types that want to create the United States of Europe. But I just don't see it happening, long term or short term. Yeah. I see the whole thing actually falling apart relatively soon. And when I say soon, I mean within the next decade.
Yeah, the more they pressure, the sooner it will fall apart. But I mean, we're not going to reform it. The individual countries or the EU, we're all too far gone here. So I'm honestly rooting for the worst, the most disruption possible.
Well, and this is something that speaks to the whole conservative philosophy, and that's small c conservative, classical liberal, things that you and I, Cvetin, talk about a lot and agree upon. And that is, there's a certain amount of, I don't know what the right word here is, of, I guess, a slight amount of pessimism or sadness concerning the whole project of humanity and whatnot. And I think that's actually good in a way, because we're not the utopians like our friends on the progressive left who believe in the perfectibility of mankind and are going full bore, full steam ahead, running roughshod over everybody else without regard to what anybody else thinks, and demanding that we all march to their beat. And so it kind of serves that slight pessimism, I guess, the sadness almost serves as a break on that utopianist project. And that's something I've always thought about, that true conservatives feel, and it's good in a way, I think.
Yeah, well, it's happened a bunch of times before, and it's bound to happen again. And best case scenario is Europe falls, and then it serves as example for the United States pour encouragement les autres. In this case, just as just as this horrible example of things going so badly, so that maybe it wakes the still salvageable parts of the world
maybe
from their stupor.
Exactly, but again, it speaks to this as conservatives, we believe we believe that mankind is fallen and broken, that we are part of the crooked timber of humanity, as Kant said, that you cannot make mankind perfect, and that it takes force and totalitarianism in order to make mankind, quote unquote, perfect, which can't be done, but to force him into that mold. And this is something that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who I think is the greatest writer of the 20th century, a Russian, I might add, who warned the West in the 1970s when he was thrown out of the Soviet Union and came to the United States, and warned the West, and not about the dangers of the Soviet Union. We already knew that. He warned us about becoming like the Soviet Union, and that was 50 years ago. And yet we didn't listen then, and we didn't listen now. And there's something in his book, Warning to the West, from 1973, that he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, you can almost see Solzhenitsyn shrugging his shoulders and sighing and saying, well, I guess mankind, everybody must learn from experience. And that's what's going to happen with the European Union, and frankly with NATO. We'll all learn
the only
from our
school of
experience.
humanity.
Sorry?
The only school of humanity.
Exactly.
Learn no place else.
Yeah. Anyway, what else we got going on that we can talk about here?
We have actually, I said there were no new major scandals breaking. We were just developing the old ones from last week. But actually, there was one. I just remembered this Chicago-based Albanian kid who is publishing wiretaps from Zaev's cache. He's aiming them at Dewey, but then he also published one, the entirety of one of the most notorious tapes from 2015, which Zaev used to spark protests against Nikola Gruevski, against VMRO. And this is the tape where Gruevski is discussing the murder of Martin Neskovski, the kid who was killed in 2011 during the VMRO celebration victory after winning the early general elections that year. And the kid was actually just he was beaten up brutally by a police officer, by a special forces policeman, and beaten to death on the Skopje Square. And then it was very difficult to identify him because the kid would not often sleep at home, so the family didn't think of reporting him as missing for a few days. And we were playing Scotland, so there was a bunch of Scots rummaging around. So you see a dead body, but nobody's claiming it, and you imagine it's maybe a Scottish football fan, or then there was this Basker Fest of these street performers, so then you can also imagine could be one of them. The policeman was Igor Spasov is the name, I think. He was trying to obscure his involvement. He didn't say nothing to fellow policemen. Policemen saw him beating the child, but not, I guess, assumed that he wasn't killed, or, maybe tried to cover up for the man for a few days. So this caused a whole bunch of, speculations about the dead body. And SDSM seized on the case in 2011. This was the early days of Twitter. So they became, Twitter was used to spread conspiracy theories that the policeman who killed the boy was very close to Nikola Gruevski, part of his personal security detail. So the entire government sprang into action to allegedly try to save him, etc. And there were some protests at the time. And then the whole thing exploded again in 2015 when Zaev published a tape, about a 3-minute tape in which Gordana Yankulovska, the interior minister, is heard saying that the kid who was killed looked like a drug addict. There were some Gruevskis discussing how his chief of security, Urko,
right, I remember him.
Was his, I remember, how he's lying about something, and this was made to look like he's lying about the murder. Mm-hmm. So this was the smoking gun which led directly to Gruevski. This sparked a major protest by SDSM. That was the evening when SDSM people tried to storm the government building. About 40 police officers were injured in the protests. They were pushing like these burning dumpsters into the police, throwing rocks at them. It was a huge mess, and it greatly contributed to the colored revolution such as it was. And now this Albanian kid in Chicago, he publishes the entire tape, 12 minutes, not just 3. Okay. And you can clearly hear that the callous statements about the kid being a drug addict is in the context that, Gordana is saying, he looks like a drug addict. He had no chance of resisting the policeman. He couldn't, it's like beating up a child, literally. He was 20-something, the kid. Against him was a somewhat older, much bigger, bulkier, special police forces member. The discussion that Urko was lying about something has nothing to do with this particular case. It becomes clear from the full context. And furthermore, it's very clear that both Nikola and Gordana are actually exceptionally worried about the murder. They are very clear-eyed that a police officer tried to conceal that he killed a boy with his bare hands on the city square, and that they're discussing at length that the policeman should not be allowed any room to avoid responsibility. Justice. And Yankulovska assures Gruevski that he will be detained the next day, and that the police will be cooperating with the investigation fully, and they will provide full available information, and the person was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Mm-hmm. And as soon as Zaev won the elections, this was even the most bizarre part, he used this murder so cold-bloodedly, so in this type of propaganda campaigns, exactly the type of thing you would expect somebody like Tal Silverstein or Eric Burns to orchestrate for Zaev. And then Zaev goes to visit the Idrizova prison where Igor Spasov is serving, and he shakes Spasov's hand in all smiles, both of them in the picture. And then shortly after, Spasov received a reprieve from serving his sentence for a while at least. Allegedly he was sick. I mean, he's obviously mentally not well, the policeman.
Right.
But he was released from prison under Zaev's mandate.
Oh.
And now we have the actual evidence that Gruevski and Kulovsk, everybody in the government, were 100% committed to prosecuting this person, providing all the evidence before the courts so the courts can put him in prison, and that it couldn't have been further from their minds to try to help him cover up the murder. And yet this was the narrative which SDSM spread about the Martin Neskovski murder, the Nikola Mladenov car crash, the Kumanovo attack, the Smilkovsko Lake, the Good Friday massacre. This just shows, how ruthless and how propagandist the campaign, the Colored Revolution campaign was. A few of the Colored Revolution people have, again, another one falls every week. They come out and say, I was fooled by this, I protested about this, I'm an idiot. Okay, thank you, but the damage is done, and the place has gone to the dogs thanks to their idiocy.
Yeah, interesting. You said the tape that El Checa published was 12 minutes, and the original tape was 3 minutes. I think it just goes to show how you can manipulate recordings, illegal recordings. I think it's worth mentioning again that never should have been published in the first place. And then you blend that with conspiracy theories, and then then there's no truth anymore. It's just kind of whatever you want to believe, and etc. And that's what our friends on the progressive left, the so-called colored revolutionaries, have chosen to believe and abide by, and now they are reaping what they have sowed.
And this was the doing of American diplomats. I mean, you cannot persuade me or anybody here that people like Eric Burns came here without the knowledge or the approval of the U.S. Embassy, of Jess Bailey, of David Stevenson. And we see this now happening in the U.S. as well. There is no more truth. Everything is a conspiracy theory. Everybody is an agent. Everybody is working for somebody. It's... I don't know what to say.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because actually I started. I'm usually working on 3 or 4 different columns at the same time, and it just depends on which one I want to finish first. But the issue of truth, especially truth in the media, especially in the West today, is one I just started working on the other day, and I'll be publishing that in the next week or two. And there is truth. There has to be truth. Otherwise, everything becomes whatever you believe truth to be. And then if there's no truth, you can't have... It's just like our old friend G.K. Chesterton says, a moral standard has to remain the same, otherwise it's not a standard. And there has to be objective truth, otherwise you have chaos. And that is exactly what we see going on in our world today. And certain people take advantage of that chaos when you reject the idea of objective truth. Anyway, let's set that aside for now. I got one more thing I want to talk about before we go to our farmers' picks, Cvetin. And of course, on our farmers' picks, I always like to end with something positive, and it's usually on tourism. This will be my farmers' pick will be something like that. But the news item I want to start with or end with before the farmers' pick is on tourism, and it's fascinating because, and I don't know, this is travelgazette.com. It says, quote, the number of tourists visiting Macedonia in May 2019 was 4.8% lower than in the same month a year earlier, according to the State Statistical Office of Macedonia. So really, this is the first time that we have seen a decline in tourists, both domestic and foreign. And I don't know, I can't remember the last time there was a decline. I mean, it's always been increasing, and May is a great time for folks to come to Macedonia. It's just before the high season. Things are still inexpensive. I mean, they're always inexpensive in Macedonia, but it's beautiful. It's still springtime, and yet the number of tourists has declined. And of course, the question is why? Is that because of the negative news coming out of Macedonia? Is that because people are afraid to go there because of Zoran Zaev is arresting American citizens? Is it because the issue with Wizz Air a couple of months ago, and which has been bringing in so many foreign tourists to Macedonia? I don't know, but I think it bears watching to see that after all these years, the number of tourists coming to Macedonia has actually declined for the first time in as long as I can remember.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, the all-important foreign espionage tourism segment is apparently doing well. So maybe maybe the collapse would have been even greater without those guys.
Exactly. Well, let's take a short break before our farmers' picks, and I just have to get here another glass of mastika.
И sve така, ко мали деца некоја вага ситна.
Ајде, не гледав, али боље што не сум гледал, така.
Немојте, не пуштајте, немојте, ја гледав, мислам дека лексилиум треба.
Нервозен и без тоа.
And welcome back to the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast. Jason, Miko, and Cvetin Chilamanov talking about all things Macedonia on a Sunday, July 14. This will drop on Monday, July 15. It's time for our farmers picks. Cvetin, what's your farmers pick?
Yeah, well, we covered Zaev and his brain farts, but let's not leave Stevo Pendarovski off the hook. Allegedly
the president, I believe.
Yeah, the polished, the worldly, the urban, the non-Zaev, the anti-Zaev SDSM politician, who is now
he was elected, duly elected. I'll call him president, so that's fine.
Yeah, of president of something, I guess.
Yeah.
And he had a few interesting, the more he's in the public eye and meeting people, the worse it ends up for him. So he basically, he had the threat that we'll start sending migrants and our criminals from Macedonia to the European Union unless we're given, the right to open EU accession talks. And now he was recently recorded, you have the big boys at some summit of Central European countries like Borisov and Brnabic, the Serbian Prime Minister, discussing, and you can just see Stevo Pendarovski trying to barge in onto the discussion. Mm-hmm. And he walks in and he's using this most Skopjan thing ever. And he says, "How are you doing, love?" to Borisov. He says, "Kako si ljubavi?" This Skopjan word, which is so, I don't know. And then he tried to explain, he tried to save himself. He said, "No, I didn't say ljubavi, I said hubavi, that's Bulgarian for beautiful." Somehow it didn't help, it didn't fix things. So then you have the Bulgarian guy and the Serbian girl checking out some infrastructure projects, and Pendarovski's creeping around them, trying to eavesdrop on what they're saying. So it was really, he's not showing himself well in the public light. It's not. This was not nothing major like threatening the European Union that will send migrants and criminals to them. Right. But he's not being well received by the.
It just sounds
by the neighbors.
Yeah, odd and creepy.
We still remember when he tried to, he went out, when we were discussing this decoupling with Albania, because this is the big deal, whether we try to open accession talks with Albania or separately, in which case, in the latter case, we have better chances of opening accession talks sooner. Now, obviously, Pendarovski was elected with the Albanian votes. Right. Macedonians didn't vote for him, or at least the majority of Macedonians. And Zaev also owes his entire political career to the Albanian votes and the Albanian parties, and Edi Rama helping him out here especially. So Pendarovski came out and said something like, "We need to decouple from Albania, thanks for all the good times, but now we'll take over from here." He was saying this to Rama, to the Albanians, and he was so openly shut down by Rama, who literally reminded him, don't forget who got you elected as president. And the very next day, Pendarovski had to walk back his statement. So he is not doing well. So the images of a hapless Stevo Pendarovski trying to become a Balkan politician, a Balkan political leader will be my farmer's pick for this week. Jason, what have you got for us?
Well, again, as I said earlier before the break, I like to end with something positive. Generally, it's on tourism. This week's farmer's pick is a little bit about tourism and what goes on in Macedonia, and that is, of course, the 2019 Galichnik Wedding Festival, which ends today. It started, I think, on Friday the 12th and goes through today, Sunday the 14th, the day we're recording. It has been going on, I believe, for almost 50 years. It is both celebrated, by Macedonians domestically, and of course attracts foreigners as a major event in which couples are getting married in the small town of Galichnik, which is it sits in I believe in Mavrovo, high in the mountains there, elevation about 1,500 meters, almost 5,000 feet. Beautiful little town. The road through Mavrovo National Park is just something to behold. It is austere, it is empty, with these beautiful golden hills and mountains surrounding you as you drive into the town of Galichnik.
The horses.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when we filmed our documentary film in 2009, A Name is a Name, we went to Galichnik and we talked to the caretaker of the church there, St. Peter's and Paul, which is the church where the weddings happen. And he had a wonderful quote about how the Turks ruled here for 500 years and they didn't make us Macedonians. We were never Turkish. We remain Macedonians and we'll always remain Macedonians. But anyway, so my farmer's pick, and you can go on the interwebs and find all kinds of things about the Galichnik Wedding Festival. But it is a wonderful part of Macedonia's history and Macedonia's culture and heritage, in which Macedonians celebrate weddings and a man and a woman getting married and then beginning their family. And I think that's just a unique and wonderful part of Macedonia's culture and history. And I encourage folks, if they haven't seen it, to schedule a time, and well, it'll have to be next year now, to go to Macedonia and witness the Galichnik Wedding Festival. That's my farmer's pick, Cvetin.
Yeah, so somebody made a quip here that if you want to be completely inclusive in the way things are going, he will have to be. Next year it might be an interethnic Galichnik gay wedding.
God forbid, no. All right. Well, I think we've managed to get a full podcast in, despite having done one just a few days ago. Always great talking to you, Cvetin.
Yeah, we're making up for the lost time and covering up all the things that happened. I think we're serving our audience base well.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope they enjoy it. It's a bit irreverent, but that's part of the fun.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and until next time.
Sounds good. Take care.
Take care.
Стига да не да...
Иване, как си?
Много добре.
Поздрав от Зоки.
Много добре. Седи тук при нас, да.
Иване, как си? Иване, как си?
Сепак очигледно Пендаровски не чувствува исто и за српската премиерка Ана Брнабиќ, на која само културно и се представи.
Доброче, ја сум Ана. Драго ми е.
Но Пендаровскиот Борисов очигледно не доби повратна изјава на љубов и мораше само да дзирка во она што го гледаат српските и бугарските колеги.
Љубави, да имаш неког, ја знал би